Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Anatomy by Dr. Vijaya. So this video will be the second part of Histology of Gastrointestinal Tract. So here I'll be talking about the microscopic features of stomach. So stomach is the dilated segment of the digestive tract. So as I mentioned in my earlier video, so every microscopic feature present in the organ of the digestive tract, they are linked to their function. So if I have to talk about the main function of the stomach, is one is it continues the digestion of carbohydrate which was initiated in the mouth. Okay, so it continues the digestion of carbohydrates. Then it has specialized cells which secretes hydrochloric acid, so it adds acidic fluid to the ingested food. Then the stomach has a thick group of muscular layer, that is in the muscularis externa. So the activity of the muscle layer, the smooth muscle cells will transform the bolus of food into viscous mass, which is called as chyme. Okay, so there will be a proper mixing of the food bolus, converting them into a chyme, okay, a viscous mass. Okay, then there are some cells which secretes enzymes like pepsin, then gastric lipase. So these promote the initial digestion of proteins and triglycerides. Okay, so these are the few main functions of the stomach. So the so just like the other organs of the digestive tract, even the stomach has four main layers in the wall. Okay, so the mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosa. So here the mucosa of an empty stomach. So if you take a section of an empty stomach, so the mucosa has numerous folds. These are temporary in nature, so these are temporary folds only seen during when the stomach is empty. Okay, so these are called as rugae. So these rugae will disappear on distension whenever the stomach is filled with the food particles. So these temporary folds disappears. Okay, then when you see the mucosa, they have many pits. So they consist of gastric pits which will lead into gastric glands. Okay, so there are invagination. So the surface epithelium of the mucosa, they invaginate into the lamina propria and they form a gastric pit which leads into gastric glands. So the stomach grossly, they are divided into four regions. So the part which is in contact with the esophagus is the proximal part, so that's called as cardia. So in my earlier video I have shown the microscopic features of the esophageal gastric junction, where in the cardia you will be seeing some cardiac glands in the lamina propria, and you can see the transition from stratified squamous epithelium, which is lining the esophagus, into simple columnar epithelium. Okay, so that part is called as the cardia. Later you will be seeing the distension, that is the fundus of the stomach, then the body, and the most distal portion is the pylorus. So this pylorus is a narrow canal, a tube-like, which will continue with the duodenum of the small intestine. So these are the four regions of the stomach: cardia, fundus, body, and pylorus. So if you see the microscopic features of these region, so the mucosa of the fundus and body differs from the mucosa of the pylorus. Okay, so pylorus, especially the mucosal layer. So mucosal layer in the fundus and body, they have identical features, but the pylorus will have a different feature. Then along with lamina propria, mucosa also has muscularis mucosa. There is a layer of smooth muscle cells. They are arranged in two layers, inner circular and outer longitudinal. Submucosa, just like in other region, that is other organs, both in every part, that is in the cardia, in the fundus, body and pylorus, the other layers are identical. So submucosa is made up of loose connective tissue consisting of blood vessels, lymphatic and nerve plexus, which are called as Meissner's plexus. Then muscularis externa, there is this thick musculature. Okay, here there is a thick group of smooth muscle cells and they are arranged in 3 layers: inner oblique, middle circular and outer longitudinal. So in the rest of the organs of the digestive tract, generally there are only 2 layers, inner circular and outer longitudinal, but in the stomach here there are 3 layers: inner oblique, middle circular and outer longitudinal. So 3 layers of smooth muscles. So this thick group of muscles undergo muscle activity, so they provide a forceful contraction needing especially which is needed for the mechanical digestion. So there is proper mixing of the food bolus and the food bolus is converted into a viscous mass called as chyme. And since stomach is enclosed, it's an intraperitoneal organ enclosed by peritoneum. So the outermost wall has serosa. Serosa means it consists of loose connective tissue. Along with that, it has mesothelium, which is nothing but simple squamous epithelium. So in this picture, you can see the stomach. So this is the esophagus part. So near to the esophagus, so the region is called as cardia. Then you will be seeing the fundus. Then that leads to body and the pylorus. Okay. So body and the fundus will have the identical feature. So let us talk about the mucosa of the body and fundus of the stomach. So the epithelium here, since the epithelium present in the stomach is mainly concerned with mechanical and chemical digestion. So they are lined by simple columnar epithelium. Okay. So the enzymes and the products which are secreted over here, they have to go to the lumen and they have to come in contact with the bolus of food. So that's why if there is a stratified multiple layer, so there will be difficulty in secretion. So that's why here you will be seeing simple columnar epithelium, and these epithelium secrete, the cells secrete mucus. So they are mucus secreting cells. And on the surface epithelium, as I mentioned earlier, so the surface epithelium invaginates into the lamina propria, forming a gastric pit on the surface. So here you can see many gastric pits. So these are nothing but the invagination of the surface epithelium into the lamina propria. Okay. So these gastric pits will lead into gastric glands. So this darker one is the gastric glands. So gastric glands has many cells. Okay. So they open into the base of the gastric pit. So whatever secretion secreted by these cells in the gastric glands, they enter the gastric pit and comes in contact with the bolus of food which is present in the lumen. And this is the lamina propria, which has the gastric glands. Okay, along with that it has blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, so mainly having the loose connective tissue. So this is the structure of the gastric gland. Okay, so having different types of cells, which I'll be talking as we go further. Okay, so here you can see the pit. This part is the gastric pit and this part is the gastric glands. So this picture is showing the gastric gland. So here you can see the gastric pit which is leading into the gastric gland. So this is the invagination of the surface epithelium. So gastric pit is formed which leads into the gastric glands. So this in the fundus and the body of the stomach, so you can see these branched tubular glands having variety of cells. Okay, so this is mainly seen in the body and the fundus of the stomach. And when you see these each gastric gland, they have different regions having different types of cells. So this part of the gastric gland is called as the isthmus. So this isthmus is near to the gastric pit. So they mainly have a differentiating mucus cells. So they mainly migrate and replenish or replace the surface mucus cells, because surface mucus cells, they are continuously producing mucus which forms a protective layer. So they come in contact with the glycoproteins and bicarbonates, and they form a protective gel, because the bolus of the food has uh, many kind of endogenous aggressors. Along with that, there is production of acid and other enzymes. So this can be an endogenous aggressor, and it might damage the epithelial cells of the stomach. So the mucus produced by these cells, they form a protective layer protecting the surface epithelial cells. So these mucus secreting cells in the isthmus, so they mainly migrate and they replace the surface mucus cells. So as we go down, the next region of the gastric gland will be called as the neck area, the neck region. So this neck region mainly has mucus neck cells. So these are again mucus secreting cells, but they are a little bit different from the mucus cells of the surface epithelium and the isthmus area. So the mucus secreted by these mucus neck cells, they say that they are less alkaline in nature. Okay. And the neck region also has one more cell called as parietal cells. Okay. So how to differentiate mucus neck cells from parietal cells? The mucus neck cells mainly they are pale in color, because since they secrete mucus, so on histological sections, since when the section is taken, they undergo different process. So while undergoing in the different process, the mucus is absorbed, so they get dissolved, and that area where the mucus is present near the apex, they look pale in color. Okay. And the parietal cells will be more eosinophilic in nature. So these parietal cells are pyramidal in shape or triangular cells, where the cytoplasm is eosinophilic, which is an acidic dye. Okay, so the content present in the cytoplasm has more affinity towards acid dye, the acidic dye, that is eosin. So they look more pinkish in color, or also called as eosinophilic or acidophilic in nature. So that is due to the presence of numerous mitochondria. So what is the function of parietal cells? So parietal cells mainly secretes gastric acid. Okay. So they undergo process where they secrete hydrochloric acid, which gets added to the ingested food. Along with that, there will be production of intrinsic factor, which is very, very important for the absorption of vitamin B12 from the small intestine. Okay, so this intrinsic factor, which will help the small intestine to absorb vitamin B12. Then in the neck area, the neck region of the gastric gland also has some enterochromaffin like cells which secretes histamine, that in turn stimulates the acid secretion. As we go down, this region will be called as the base of the gastric gland area. So this base of the gastric gland has a basophilic cell called as chief cells or zymogen cells. Okay, so these are abundantly present at the base of the gastric gland. So they mainly secrete pepsin and gastric lipase, which mainly help in the initiation of digestion of proteins and triglycerides. So these are mainly secreted by chief cells, also called as zymogen cells. So these chief cells are basophilic in nature because they take up basic dye. Okay, so that is, they take up the hematoxylin and they look bluish or purple in color because they have numerous rough endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, so that's why they take up basic dye and they are basophilic in nature. So along with that, there are other enteroendocrine cells present here over here, just how it is present in the intestine, small intestine. So there are some enteroendocrine cells here as well, like D cells and G cells. So these cells mainly helps in one will inhibit the acid secretion, the other one will stimulate the acid secretion, because there should be a balance. So if there is excess secretion of acid, so this might harm or damage the epithelial cells of the stomach. Okay, and if there's excessive production of acid, so that forms an endogenous aggressor. Even the enzymes, the pepsin, lipase, then the acid secreted by the parietal cells. So all are needed in balance. So there should be a control. Okay. So if there is excess production, and along with that, if there is hyper osmolality of the ingested food, or if the person is taking more of non-steroidal, that is NSAIDs, anti-inflammatory drugs, or alcohol, ethanol. Okay, so these mainly they damage the epithelial cells of the stomach, and that leads to a condition called as gastric ulcer. So initially, if it is in a milder if there's a mild damage, that can be healed automatically, but if it goes on, that can lead to ulceration. Okay, that's called as gastric ulcer. So initially it will be inflammation, gastritis, so that can lead into ulceration. So mucus secreting cells in the mucosa and gastric glands. So they mainly protect the erosion of the epithelium. So the erosion can, if it goes on, can lead to ulceration. Then the parietal or the oxyntic cells in the gastric gland, they provide hydrogen ions which are needed for, this is very much the HCl production, not only to add on the acidic fluid. So hydrogen ions are needed for the secretion of gastric enzymes, okay, for the digestion, for the function of digestion. Then intrinsic factor, as I mentioned earlier, necessary for absorption of vitamin B12 from the small intestine. Then chief or zymogenic cells in the gastric glands, they provide gastric enzyme for the chemical digestion. Okay, so these cells mainly help in chemical digestion. So here is a picture of the pyloric, or the body, sorry, not the pyloric, the fundus and the body of the stomach. Okay, so how to tell whether it is the fundus or the body of the stomach? So when you can see here, as I mentioned, the gastric glands has variety of cells. So when you see the ratio between the length of the gastric pit and the length of the gastric gland, so you can see the length of the gastric pit is shorter compared to the length of the gastric glands. Okay, so this is simple columnar epithelium, so which are invaginating here. Okay, so this forms the gastric pit. So if I give an example here, so this is the gastric pit, which is shorter when compared to the gastric gland. So it is around 1:2 ratio. Okay, so and you can see variety of cells over here. So here you can't differentiate the different types, but here if we go a little bit to higher magnification, so you can see the eosinophilic, more pinkish colored cells. So those are the parietal cells having a round spherical nuclei. Then you can see here the basophilic, the purplish or bluish in color. So these are the chief cells, okay, or zymogen cells. So this tells, if you're seeing the ratio between the length of the gastric pit and the gastric gland is 1:2, that is shorter gastric pit, longer gastric gland. So that automatically you can tell it is the microscopic picture of a body or the fundus of the stomach. Now coming to the mucosa of pylorus of the stomach. So here those variety of cells are not present. So basically mainly in the cardia and the pylorus part of the stomach mainly has mucus secreting cells, more of mucus secreting cells. And since they have less cells compared to the body and the fundus, so you can see longer pits and shorter glands. Okay, so it's the other way around, 2:1. So gastric pits are longer than the gastric pits in the body of the stomach. So longer pits and shorter glands. So the bases of the glands are more coiled here compared to the glands present in the body of the stomach. So when a section is taken, so you can see more circular area here. So that is due to coiling of the gastric glands. So you can see here at the base. Okay, the cells of the gastric glands are mucus secreting cells, so more in number. There are few parietal and enteroendocrine cells, but they are very few. But more are mucus secreting cells, which forms a protective layer. So at the pylorus, pylorus has different parts. So there is pyloric antrum, canal, and pyloric sphincter. So at the pyloric sphincter, the inner oblique muscle layer is very thick, so they form a sphincter there. Okay, so there should be sphincteric action over there. Okay, so there you'll be seeing a thick group of muscle cells, the smooth muscle cells. So in this picture, so this is upside down. So you can see the longer gastric pits and a shorter glands, the gastric gland area or the pyloric glands. So at the base, the glands are coiled, so that's why you're seeing more circular one. Okay, here also you can see the longer gastric pit. So this is a longer gastric pit and this is the pyloric gland. So the base here are circular. So here also the gastric pits are longer, and at the base the pyloric glands are coiled. So that's why you can see the circular one. Okay. So the thick muscularis externa, the contraction of those smooth muscle cells mainly helps in thorough mixing of the food, the bolus of food, and converts them into a viscous mass, the chyme. Okay, so they have a very good muscular activity and also pushes the chyme into the small intestine for the further digestion. So this completes the second part of Histology of Gastrointestinal Tract. So these are my references. Thank you for watching.